Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to my focus lesson. My name is Aaron Costner. I'm a recent graduate of the Shenandoah Valley Writing Project, summer of 2020. And I told myself I was going to knock this presentation out in one take, so we'll see how that goes. So this is my focus lesson. It's entitled Modern Caves, Exploring Worldview Through Writing. And what you'll see in this presentation is a collection of different activities that facilitate metacognition and reflection by students about their own perspectives and the perspectives of others, both people in the real world and people in literature. And so this is a collection of things that you can try out in your classroom, hopefully this year, and again, hopefully with great success. So for the purposes of this conference video, what I will do is lead you through an activity, and then I'll say you may pause now or something like that. And when you hear that, you can simply pause your video. If you want to have the student experience like you might have in the writing project, or if you just want to kind of do the exercise yourself to get the experience, then you can hit pause when I say to pause. Try the activity and then just hit play, and we will continue on with the demonstration. So let's see, where do we start? All right, for an opening activity, this is the way I like to begin any kind of emphasis on perspective or worldview or anything like that. So what I would do is ask the students to open to a new page in their daybook, and on each of the next 4 slides, you'll see a simple image. At least it might look simple at the beginning. And when the image first appears, I want you to write down what you see first. And so I'm just going to do that. I'm going to roll through these 4 slides, and whatever you see first, if you are so inclined, you can jot it down. And then we'll go back through them, and I'll tell you what you may have not noticed in the picture. So here's the first one. Just write down what you see, or just kind of keep it in your mind. Number 2. Number 3. And number 4. Now I'll go ahead and take myself out of the presentation for a moment. And we're going to go back up to the first slide and just take another look. So you may have seen 2 different things. You may have seen a frog sitting on a lily pad. But if you take and just kind of rotate your head to the right, don't go too far, don't hurt yourself. But if you turn your head a little bit, you might see a horse. So I hope you can see my cursor here. But if you're seeing a frog first, the frog's head would be here, the back leg would be here, front leg would be right there. The horse's eyeball, though, is right there. The other eye would be hidden over here. This would be the nostrils, and this would be the mouth. So there's the first one. Second one, this one's a classic. I think a lot of people have seen this one. You could have either seen an old woman or a young one. If you saw the young woman, then you would see her eyelash right here. Her cheekbone is coming up like this. This is her chin and her jawline, and her face is actually turned to her right, away from us, and of course this is her hair. If you saw the old woman, then you're seeing a large nose. This is still an eyelash, but here is an eyeball now instead of the ear of the young woman. And then here is her mouth slightly agape, and her chin is kind of pointy down here. This one kind of frustrates people because I feel like this one is one where it takes some time to see one if you really lock the first one in your brain. So hopefully you're able to see 2 of them. Here's number 3. This one's relatively simple. You can either see a series of pillars, or you can see the space between, which is the negative space, the silhouette of a young man. just repeat it over and over. So that was pretty straightforward. And I always tell people to be honest when they see this one. Depending on the time of day and how hungry you are, you may have started out seeing fried chicken, crispy chicken fritters, or maybe you saw the puppies first. I don't know. But anyway, chicken or puppies for that. So I like to start the lesson with this activity because it's very low risk. It's fun. Kids like seeing one thing and then you hear them say like, "Oh, I didn't see. Oh, I see it now." So it's a fun way to get things started when you're talking about perspective, and it kind of it gets kind of a real example in their brain, and like in the classroom setting of, oh, this was my perspective. I saw this thing first, but now I can see and experience what someone else saw that wasn't what I saw. And so I kind of use this as a way to segue into another big idea regarding perspective, and that is a classic story that's taken from Plato's Republic. It's called The Allegory of the Cave. And very simply, Socrates hypothesizes that there are these prisoners that have been in a cave for their whole existence, and all they've ever been able to see are these shadows across a wall. And because that's all they've ever seen, they take the shadows to be real things that actually exist. But his allegory goes on to say that, well, if one of the prisoners were set free and made to escape, then they would see, no, behind them is actually a fire which is casting shadows of real images on the wall in front of them. And they could see that, well, what I was actually seeing is not all there is. It's not true reality. And so this is a kind of a big abstract philosophical idea that you can take and apply to a lot of different things. And it's a cool way to kind of set the stage for talking about perspective. All right, so just quick background about myself. This school year is going to be my 10th year of teaching. I started at Freedom High School in Tampa, Florida, and I'm currently at Harrisonburg High School teaching 9th grade English debate and an elective class called the Bible as Literature. And very interested / excited, kind of a complicated mix of those, to see how the school year is going to go, teaching virtually. Best of luck to you if you are going to be teaching virtually as well. As far as Harrisonburg High School goes, total enrollment for this year is going to be over 1,900. Free and reduced lunch is over 70%, so we're teaching a population of kids that has a lot of economically disadvantaged students. And then you can see a quick breakdown of our ethnicity and race categories. We enjoy being a very diverse school. It is a gift to our students, and we tell them that consistently, and we really do think they embrace that as a bigger learning experience that they are given by virtue of being students at our school. All right, so to kind of set the framework for this presentation, the idea for this focus lesson owes a lot to a book called Why Teach by Mark Edmondson. He's a professor of English at UVA. And he seizes on this idea that education should involve what John Keats called soul making. And that's a big abstract concept, but here's a simple idea. Our students need content knowledge, but so much of our educational system is designed only for the transmission of facts. And the question that I would want to wrestle with throughout this presentation is, how wonderful would it be if our students left school with a deeper and more profound understanding of themselves? Of course, they need the content knowledge. They have to meet standards. We have to make sure we're teaching them standards. But I think that we're missing a big opportunity if we're not giving them something deeper than that. My most profound experiences in education happened when I was able to learn more about myself in the context of learning great things and great information, because that's when it becomes real to our students. So lesson goals real quickly. Using writing to engage in metacognition, observing the way we think, thinking about our thinking. Also to reflect on the influences which have shaped our thinking. So I want to get into a little bit with this first activity of allowing students to step outside themselves for a little bit, look in as an observer on their own mind and the influences that have brought them up, and shape them. And then finally, to consider alternative perspectives in both literature and society at large. So there's, again, a lot of goals here. We're trying to give students an opportunity to examine themselves, other perspectives, their own perspectives, and just kind of a confluence of all these factors. All right, so what you're seeing here is a resource that's in the handout, in the folder that you have access to. This is called a metacognitive map, and it's a very simple thing to set up. If you would like to participate in this activity, I would give you a chance now to pause the video and create this chart, just a simple version of it in your own daybook or notebook. So you can pause now. And I'll use this opportunity to make sure my phone is on silent. Okay. Now you're going to see the timer up across the top here. I'm not going to use the timer because, of course, we're not in a live setting, and you can pause and play the video as you choose to. Again, metacognition is thinking about our own thinking. And you can do this at many different levels. This is not just an upper grade thing. This can be adapted for all different grade levels, I believe. So in the first column, the ideas column, I would ask students to write down a list of 10 ideas, beliefs, or convictions that they have. You can write a few more, a few less, and I would be clear with students that we will not share these lists with each other, which allows them to be honest and sincere. Students can go light with this. They can go more serious with it. It's up to them because it's a safe place in their day books. I do the day book practice. It's a safe place for them to reflect and to write. I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to ask them to share it. This is purely an exercise for them. So if you are interested in doing that, you may pause now and complete that first step. In step 2, in the influences column, I would now ask them to write a list of people, family members, friends, authors, speakers, musicians, artists, teachers, public figures, etc. Try to cover all of them. Or things like books, movies, songs, stories, art, which have had a shaping influence on their thinking. Somebody, as we were doing this in the writing project, asked, well, what about events? And I would say that would be a totally acceptable thing to use as well. If there was an event that had a huge shaping influence on you and your thinking, absolutely include that. But this is step 2. In the influences column, try to list some of these things that you identify as having had a shaping influence on your thinking. And you may pause the video now. Step 3 would be to see if you can make any connections between the ideas you wrote and the influences you listed. So for example, if your idea in the number 1 spot in the idea column, if number 1, you can see a clear connection between what you wrote in the influences column at spot number 3, then you would simply draw a line between those two things. It may be easy for you to create connections between ideas and influences. You may just have a lot of lines connecting the first column and the second column. Or it may be difficult to see very many connections at all. And the point of the metacognitive map is not to create easy connections between ideas and influences. The point is really to just explore any connections that might be there. And so if you were making those connections, you can pause your video now. And as a final step, this would be where the writing enters. Observe what you see. And below the metacognitive map, write to reflect on what this exercise reveals to you. And this step is intentionally left very open because, again, this is something that, number one, I would not be asking students to share with me or with their peers unless they wanted to. But this activity also, on a larger scale, I think would probably have to happen once a classroom culture has been established. Because even though the writing and the reflection is taking place in private, meaning they're not going to be sharing with me or with their peers, this is still an activity which asks students to do some real and sincere reflection about themselves. So this is something that I would not, do in the first week or two of school. It may take a month, maybe 2 months to really establish the culture that is needed for something like this. But I do intentionally keep number 4 pretty open so that students can kind of go their own direction with it. Now, I teach debate as well. And so you notice that column that has the check mark at the top. You can use this maybe several ways, but one way that I use it is in that left column with the check at the top. I ask students to go back through their ideas and check the ideas that they believe they could prove to others to be factually true. In other words, which of those ideas could you prove are actually true to other people? That can be an interesting thought experiment. And I think what a lot of students would find is that the things that they listed don't fall under the empirically verifiable category. And so in a debate classroom, this has the value of showing students that things that they think may be self-evident would be more difficult than they think to convince others of. And so that can lead to kind of interesting conversations and learning opportunities. And so again, the point of the metacognitive map is this. When we take time to intentionally call up and write out our sincerest ideas and beliefs and try to make connections with the voices that have had the greatest influences on us, we move closer to a more accurate picture of ourselves and the way we see the world. And so options for adaptation. One is use this as a pre-writing strategy for a persuasive essay or a research project. Ask students to pick one of the statements that they wrote in the ideas column for their thesis or topic. Just as an option for how you would adapt this to your classroom. And I want to share a quote with you that kind of wraps this all up. This is from George Hillocks at University of Chicago. This book, Teaching Writing as a Reflective Practice, extraordinarily dense, very, very heavy theoretical stuff. Interesting parts of it. I can talk more in Q&A about this if you like. I'll leave it at that. He says, when we write or speak, we posit ourselves as persons with beliefs, memories, motives, and aspirations, none of which exist independently of the others. And so this activity has been designed to try to explore those relationships and how they influence our ideas. How have we been shaped? What gets us to this moment in time where we are right now as thinkers and learners? So that's the first one. So now we're going to move on to one that is really built for an in-person classroom, although I was able to adapt it to our Zoom meeting in the writing project, and it was great fun. Because we're doing this asynchronously and this is a video, what I'm going to do is just go through the procedure for this next activity. So back to Mark Edmondson here in Why Teach. He says, for a student to be educated, she has to face brilliant antagonists. She has to encounter thinkers who see the world in different terms than she does. And this is part of what makes debate such a great thing. I mean, I get to teach debate as an elective, so I get to see this absolutely being confirmed in classes. But debate can happen anywhere. Um, so that's really what this activity is about. This is how I would structure, initiate, and execute a debate in a class. So my text is going to work out here. Step one is to brainstorm ideas for a philosophical chair debate. A philosophical chair is a pretty well-established procedure for a debate. You can just look online and find different structures for how to do this, and you can adapt it the way you want to. So here's some examples from my students last year. These are the ones that they came up with. First one is marching band a sport. I love to talk about this. There's a lot of band kids in debate class, and so inevitably somebody brings up, well, is marching band a sport? Fine. You want to talk about that? Let's do it. If there's enough support for it, let's do it. This is not a joke. Is Thomas the Tank Engine appropriate for children? This came up so much throughout the last 4 years because one student loved to bring it up, and he became known as the guy that loved to argue that Thomas the Tank Engine was not appropriate for children because it promoted tyranny and slave labor and things like that. So, I mean, it is what it is. Should the school dress code be abolished? That's a recurring one. Is it more important in life to have money or relationships? This one is fantastic. I have run that one with all levels of students, both students in every class they've got is AP or honors, and the regular level kids too, ELL students. They love to talk about and debate this as well. That was a great one. And then this one was heavier. This happened in a debate class. Should hate speech be considered free speech? That's a very sensitive topic for a lot of students. And so you have to use your own good judgment as the teacher in the classroom about what you're comfortable with, what your students would respond well to. And I say that again here. The topics are short. I'll say that again in a minute. But this is about noticing the topics and how they're short and written to allow for a two-sided debate. And word choice matters. It's got to be clear. There can't be a lot of terminology in there that's, can be defined lots of different ways. You have to avoid unclear terms. So at this point, this is how it starts. On a new page in your daybook, we would brainstorm ideas for a philosophical chair debate. Write your ideas as a two-sided or yes or no question. So I would give the class some time to just brainstorm. I say, it doesn't need to be, you don't have to like all your ideas because they would share and kind of like prune them down. But just start by getting some ideas out onto your page. And so I'd give them some time to do that. Step two, I would ask them to choose their best topic idea. Now you can do that by, just getting them to choose and then share with a partner, or they can just like get in little groups and share what they came up with. And then, what usually happens is, somebody will share an idea and another partner will say, I really like that one. Or what if we did it like this instead? That can happen. So they can kind of work together, collaborate to come up with a really, good topic. And then we have to decide, well, how are we going to come to a consensus about what our topic is going to be? And I like to use this site called Padlet for that. It's free. It's easy to access for me and for the kids. I think that's linked in the handout as well. So what they do is they go down here to this little icon on the bottom right, and they click that and they put their topic there. And then it populates this page where they can see everybody else's ideas, and they can rate it by 1 out of 5 stars. They can give it a like. They can click a heart, whatever you choose to make it do. Here's an example from the writing project this spring. These are actual debate topics that the teachers in the writing project came up with. And then they were able to vote on them based on how well they liked them. And you see what we've got here. We've got the front runners were things like, did Carol Baskins feed her husband to tigers? Should everyday people be allowed to have an animal sanctuary? Should states be allowed to reopen businesses now during the COVID outbreak? Or, and this is the one that we'd actually debated, should you eat ice cream cake with a fork or a spoon? And so, yes, we did end up having a full-on debate in Zoom about whether we should eat ice cream cake with a fork or a spoon. And you might be like, well, how could you ever debate that? I'm telling you, passions were flying about this topic. It went different directions. It was kind of cool. So that's what you do. You got to get it in front of all your students in a way that they can see the options available to them. And so they can simply rate them by a number of stars. And so I highlighted the ones blue that received the most votes. And then I made the executive call to keep it light and go with the ice cream one. So that was that. Step 3, I jumped a little bit ahead on the last slide, but once we narrow down on one single topic, step 3 is to write it down and to do a free write on it. And so I ask students, what points are you going to make for your side? In terms of sides, you can do a quick show of hands, who's on this side, who's on the other side, and see if you have more or less a split. You don't have to have a 50-50. Sorry about that. I had to contain my dog a little bit. But you don't have to have a 50-50 split in your debate. You can have a 1/3 versus the other 2/3. Because I tell the students, you can win a debate just on your own against a whole group. It all depends on the quality of the arguments you're making. It doesn't have to be who has more people on their side. That's not how you win. And so after the free write of however long you choose, 5 minutes is probably adequate, but it does depend on your grade level. We will group you with your teammates and let you discuss and prepare to debate. So they've seen the topic, they've done some free writing, now they get to discuss it in a small group in preparation for a large group activity. These are some of my rules for engagement in a class debate. One speaker at a time, 1 minute speech limit, because you have kids that will get up and talk for many minutes if they're not asked to stop. Number 3, the winner is determined by point totals. And so this is where you start to be objective about who won the debate. So your side gets points for making a good point. I know that's vague, but that's what I tell them. Using a controlled voice or tone, using evidence, refuting the other side's points. So what I will do is sit in the middle in the front, and I will tally when each side does those things to give them their points. However, your side loses points for doing one of these things: interrupting the other side, someone not paying attention, someone playing games using their phone, shouting, snickering, tomfoolery of any kind. But I don't subtract these points. I get my teaching assistant to do it. So often you have juniors or seniors that will have an open block and they'll get a TA spot. And so I'll have a junior or senior who's not part of the class. They're just there to assist me. I know that's a luxury that high school teachers have that middle and elementary do not. But you may be able to pull someone to help you with this. It's nice because it takes the pressure off of me to take points away. I don't become the bad guy. I get the student to become the bad guy, taking points away. And of course, they have to be honest and they have to be paying attention well and everything. They're usually very, very happy to help. Because in the case of seniors, they love to crack down on the freshmen that are doing things wrong. So they're the ones that take the points away. I give points, and then we do the subtraction from totals at the end to decide who won. And so it's very objective. All right. Another possibility, ask students to argue for the other side. So back to the whole ice cream cake thing. If a person was of the mind that you never, ever eat ice cream cake with a spoon, if that's just a no-no, you could ask them to argue the other side. And of course, that's silly. But if you were talking about a more serious topic, if you were talking about, if you're talking about gun rights, gun control in America, and you ask students to argue for the other side, now that's a challenge. But it's a good challenge. Because back to the Mark Edmondson quote, a student to be truly educated has to face brilliant antagonists. But what happens if they have to become their own antagonists? Now that's an opportunity for growth. A couple other options for adaptation here. Writing as debate preparation. There's something called the resolution analysis in the handout that you have access to. That's a handout that asks them to break down at the technical level a debate resolution. A resolution is simply a statement that gets debated. It has a yes side and a no side. Adaptation for fiction. You could let students write to defend or criticize an author's choices in a narrative, or ask them to focus on a specific detail, such as a choice made by one of the characters. And they'd say, this was good or this was not good. This was a proper action, here's why, or it wasn't. You can run a mock trial where students become the defense, the prosecution, and the jury, putting a character on trial. You implement speech writing activities there as the basis for this activity. Maybe they have to write an argument that they will present either verbatim, or they just say it as a paraphrase, whatever you choose. But there's a lot of opportunities for them to use writing to prepare for a high stakes activity. Knowing they'll be doing activities like this in advance creates a greater incentive to read critically and, dare I say, even annotate the text. For nonfiction, let students debate a local, state, national policy. Of course, being mindful of how some issues may be more sensitive. Something I've done before is use Newsella articles as a whole class read, and then students wrote a persuasive piece first and then formulated resolutions to use as the basis for debates. So we use a nonfiction article about something in the news. The students do writing of some kind before as a way to prepare for a whole class debate. And so you can make it very, very accessible. You can say, like, here's your article. Let's see what we think about this. Do you agree or disagree with what's happening? Or even if you're using an opinion piece, do you agree or disagree with the author, and why? And you can use that writing opportunity to get them prepared for a whole class engagement. Okay. Now this is, again, a metacognitive kind of self-analysis here, but we're now looking at other individuals. And I'll give you a couple of options for adaptation here as well. This is called Another Person's Shoes, Exercise in Perspective. Again, I'm not going to hit the timer here, but the first step is in a daybook, notebook, you would write to describe a time you had a disagreement or conflict with someone. So here's some things to consider as in your writing. What was the issue? How did the other party respond? And describe how the conflict made you feel. And so if you are going to complete this activity, you may pause the video now. Now the next step, once students have had a little bit of time to write about this disagreement or conflict, is to write an I am poem, but not one that's about you or them. So an I am poem is I think it's used a lot in the first couple of days of school to as a way to get to know your students. I know sometimes teachers will use this. They'll write it themselves and then they'll share it with their students as a way to introduce yourself to your new kids. But this one is different because you're not going to write about you. You're going to step into the mind of the person you just wrote about and write an I am poem from their perspective. So you started by reflecting on a time you had a disagreement or a conflict with someone. That person is now the perspective from which you're writing the I am poem. So if a student says, well, yesterday I had a conflict with my mom. She asked me to do something, I didn't want to do it. That was the conflict. That student would write an I am poem about his or her mother. If helpful, use the details from the entry you just wrote to inform what you add to the poem. So the I am poem template is in the handout as well, and this is what it looks like if you haven't written one before. Each of these bold parts starts the line, and then you complete the rest of the line. So your first line would be I am, and you would add 2 special characteristics you have. And so this would be completed from the perspective of the other person. And so if you wanted to try this on your own right now, you may pause your video now. So this part of this activity can be a challenge because maybe they don't know the person very well. And you can say, well, if that's the case, you can hypothesize, you can just kind of imagine what that person would put there. But the point is that we want them in the second step to try to get their mind away from focusing on themselves and trying to see it from another person's perspective. But then we take it up yet another notch in this next step. And this is the writing opportunity ending reflection. And here are the directions. Now, imagine that you have never met the person in the I am poem. In other words, imagine you do not know the person with whom you had the conflict or the disagreement. You don't know them. Below the poem you wrote, answer this question. If you read this I am poem without having met the other person, what would you say they value? What do they care about? And again, we're trying to get students to step into a place intellectually, mentally, that maybe they don't go very often. Because we're trying to encourage them to see someone else from a radically different perspective. Not just someone with whom they're having a conflict, but we're trying to get them to step out of their own mind and become a dispassionate observer of this other person using the I am poem. So if you would like to take a moment and try this out, you may pause your video now. And as I move on, I would maybe get them to share in small groups to start and ask them to discuss, okay, what was it like to write this piece? What did this experience show you? How did it help you to understand the nature of the conflict you wrote about? They don't have to share what the conflict or the disagreement was, but they can share what this activity showed them about the conflict, about what it taught them, about what did it reveal to them about their own feelings or their own perspective. And here's an option for adaptation. Some reflective writing. Think of the 5 people with whom you spend the most time. If they were asked what you value the most, what would they say? This adaptation turns it away from another person and turns it back to them. Well, if we ask the 5 people you spent the most amount of time with, what's important to you and what you value, then what would they say? Who are you through the lens of 5 other people? And I'm sure you can probably think of some ways to adapt this as well. And now this is the 4th and final activity that I'd like to share. Now this one specifically looks at fiction. exploring other perspectives in fiction. And what we do here is rewrite a story or a scene from another character's point of view. And this can be used with a range of different literature types. But what I have had success in doing in ninth grade English is using children's stories. Because again, it's pretty low risk. You can read a new children's story pretty quickly. You can check them out from your library. And believe it or not, like high school kids really like getting to read children's books. Like whenever you bring in Dr. Seuss, they just get excited. And actually one of the activities I do in my debate class to try to encourage reticent speakers to get in front of an audience is I tell them, go pick a children's book out of the section where you find your Dr. Seuss and etc. And just go pick one you like and bring it back and read it, all of it or a little bit of it in front of the class and just have fun with it. It's not even graded. Or you can just give them a 10 out of 10 for a little participation credit. But it's totally low pressure. They have fun with it and they're standing in front of a group of people reading, speaking. That's what I want. They think they're just having fun, but they're doing something that's uncomfortable and getting out of a comfort zone in front of an audience. I'm making them speak in front of people. Anyway, that's a tangent, but this is one take, so it is what it is. Just real quick, these things that I've got on the screen, True Story, The Three Little Pigs. This retells the story from the wolf's perspective and makes the three little pigs look like the bad guys. This one is even more abstract. In this one, the three little pigs somehow find their way out of the story. The illustrations are incredible. They actually fall out of the frames and they go exploring through other tales and they encounter dragons and knights and other things. And it's a pretty cool rendition of the story. So the first step here would be to think of a story you know well. Children's books work well for this because the plots are often short and often the point of view is third person limited, which means we're looking at one character and we only know kind of what is going on in their minds. And the narrator is outside the storyline. You can have them just think of a story they know well, or again, you could actually get your librarian eventually to bring books to the classroom. You could have them, if you're distance learning, you could have them find one in their home, or you can even provide these in what's available in ebook and PDF well in advance enough that they can have it and read it. However you can make it happen, make it happen. But yeah, the point is think of a story that you know well or you have access to. Number two, once you have chosen your story, pick one of the characters other than the protagonist, the main character, and retell the story, or just part of it, from his or her, its point of view. So we're trying to get them, again, to consider a different perspective, explore a different perspective than the one that the author explicitly gave. So Max's story in Where the Wild Things Are, like we're following him as he's going off on this fantastic journey. But we don't really hear a lot from the Wild Things perspective. What was happening in their world before he showed up? What did he represent to them? What did they think was going to happen by him visiting their world? Can be lots of opportunities for them to explore. So if you are going to take a crack at this, you may pause your video now. And so as we kind of bring this to a close, I want to share one actual example from one of my students several years ago. I have not done the Odyssey with a class for several years. I will again this year. But of course, the story at the end of the Odyssey is that Odysseus returns home to Ithaca, where he goes into his palace, and he finds out that it's been inundated with suitors who thinks that he is dead, and they are all eating his food, drinking his wine. And all of them hope to be the new husband of Penelope, his wife, and ergo the king of Ithaca. And so we get a little bit of talk from them throughout the end there, but what this student chose to do was rewrite that entire scene from the perspective of the suitors. And you can pause this at any time and read this if you want. The formatting is going to be weird on the next slide because I just did screenshots of the writing. But this to me was an incredible example of a student exploring a different perspective in the tale, and I loved it. It's pretty intense, but again, it showed that he really invested some energy into exploring another perspective. This is how it ends here. And so the point of this activity is considering worldview in the context of a story can lead to greater depth of a student's experience in literature. It can help them see that authors give us not a single plot line, but many universes, small universes in their stories. And in those universes are all these different perspectives and ideas to explore. And so this helps them consider how much bigger a literary world can be. And that ranges all the way from a children's book like Where the Wild Things Are, all the way up to, an epic poem like the Odyssey. We want to encourage our students to explore the worlds that authors create, and this is one way that can be facilitated. And so on September, I'm sure you have access to the date. Well, that's silly because it's going to be the same day, right at the same time. 12:30 on September 12th, I'll be doing a quick Q&A about this presentation. If I said something, showed you something in the presentation that you'd like to have a question answered about, feel free to tune in at that time, and I'll be happy to talk to you about that. But I want to thank you for tuning in once again. I hope these can be helpful to you in the coming school year, even in a digital virtual setting. Hope these can be adapted to help you reach some students. And thanks again for your time, and take care, everyone.